What happens in the moment you take your last breath? I don't mean in a poetic sense or a spiritual sense. I mean really, physically, what happens when you die? It's a question that everyone wonders about, but few of us truly examine with clear eyes. We surround death with so much emotion, so much fear, so much hope for something beyond, that we rarely stop to ask what the actual evidence tells us about this most universal of human experiences. And here's the thing. When you look at what actually happens, when you strip away the stories we tell ourselves and examine the biology, the chemistry, the physics of it, you discover something that's both sobering and strangely beautiful. You discover that death is not a moment, but a process, not an ending, but a transformation, and that understanding it honestly might actually change how you think about the time you have right now. Death is perhaps the most universal human experience we'll all eventually face, yet it remains one of the least understood by most people in terms of what actually happens from a biological and physical standpoint. We tend to approach death with emotion, with fear, with hope for something beyond. And I understand that completely, because I'm human too, and those feelings are natural. But rarely do we stop to consider what the evidence actually tells us about the process itself. What does happen when you die? Not in a spiritual or metaphorical sense, but in terms of measurable, observable, biological and physical processes. Let me walk you through what we actually know, and I promise to be honest with you, even when the truth isn't particularly comforting. When we talk about death, we need to first understand what we mean by being alive, and this is actually more interesting than it sounds. Life, from a biological perspective, is a process, not a thing. You are not a static object sitting there unchanged. You're a dynamic system constantly maintaining itself through ongoing activity. Right now, as you're reading this, your cells are continuously taking in nutrients, burning fuel, repairing damage that accumulates every second, and eliminating waste. Your heart is pumping blood, your lungs are exchanging gases, your brain is processing information through millions of electrical and chemical signals happening simultaneously. Life is the maintenance of this extraordinarily complex set of processes in a state far from equilibrium. You are, in a very real and physical sense, fighting against entropy, against disorder, every single moment you exist. And it's exhausting work, even though you're not consciously aware of most of it. Death occurs when this process can no longer sustain itself, when the maintenance systems fail and the whole complex system begins to break down irreversibly. But here's something that might surprise you. Death is not instantaneous in the way we often imagine it. Different parts of your body die at different rates, and the transition from alive to dead is more of a gradient, a slope, than a sharp cliff edge. When we say someone has died, what we typically mean is that their heart has stopped beating, and they've stopped breathing, but at that precise moment, not all of their cells are actually dead yet. Many are still alive and functioning, at least for a time. Some cells will continue living for minutes, even hours, after what we call death. Let's start with what happens in those first crucial moments, because this is where things get really interesting. When your heart stops pumping blood, oxygen stops being delivered to your cells. And oxygen, it turns out, is absolutely crucial because it's the final electron acceptor in the process your cells use to produce energy. Your cells burn glucose, breaking it down step by step through a series of chemical reactions, and at the end of this process, electrons are passed oxygen to form water. This process, called cellular respiration, produces ATP, which is basically the molecular currency of energy in your body, the fuel that powers everything you do. Without oxygen, this remarkably efficient process stops working. Your brain is particularly sensitive to oxygen deprivation because brain cells consume enormous, almost absurd amounts of energy relative to their size. They're firing constantly, maintaining electrical potentials across their membranes, pumping ions back and forth, releasing and recapturing neurotransmitters, doing this intricate dance that somehow gives rise to your thoughts and feelings and memories. Within about 4 to 6 seconds of your heart stopping, you lose consciousness as your brain cells run out of the oxygen they desperately need. It happens fast. Within just a few minutes, brain cells begin to die, and this is why rapid resuscitation is so absolutely critical in emergency medicine. If the heart can be restarted quickly enough, If oxygen delivery can be restored before too much damage occurs, the person can sometimes be brought back with little or no brain damage. But the window is narrow, frighteningly narrow. Time matters enormously. As cells are deprived of oxygen, they don't just give up. They try desperately to keep going, switching to anaerobic metabolism, attempting to produce energy without oxygen. But this backup system is far less efficient and produces lactic acid as a byproduct, and this actually explains something you might have heard about. This buildup is why muscles become stiff after death, a condition called rigor mortis. The cells are essentially running out of energy, their ATP supplies are depleting, and they can no longer maintain the relaxed state that actually requires energy to sustain. The proteins in muscle fibers become locked together like gears that have seized up. This stiffness peaks at around 12 hours after death, and then gradually fades over the next day or two as the proteins themselves begin to break down. Without circulation, without the heart pumping blood through your vessels, gravity takes over in a way it never could while you were alive. Blood begins to pool in the lowest parts of the body, a process called livor mortis. If someone dies lying on their back, blood settles in the back and sides, pulled down by gravity because there's no pump pushing it around anymore. This creates a purple-red discoloration that becomes visible through the skin and becomes fixed, permanent, after several hours as the blood cells begin to break down and hemoglobin starts to leak out through vessel walls. Meanwhile, your body's temperature begins to drop, moving toward equilibrium with the surrounding environment. A living body maintains a temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius through constant metabolism, through the burning of fuel in your cells. When that stops, when the furnaces go out, body cools at a fairly predictable rate, roughly 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius per hour, though this varies quite a bit depending on environmental conditions like air temperature and whether the body is clothed or in water. This cooling, called algor mortis, is actually one of the ways forensic scientists estimate time of death, though it's not as precise as television shows make it seem. As hours pass, cells throughout the body are dying, and as they die, they release their contents. Cell membranes, which in life are carefully maintained structures with sophisticated pumps and channels, begin to break down and fall apart. Lysosomes, little organelles that contain powerful digestive enzymes, normally kept safely compartmentalized like toxic chemicals in sealed containers. These rupture and release their contents into the cell. These enzymes begin to digest the cell from the inside, literally eating it, a process called autolysis or self-digestion. This is separate from decomposition caused by bacteria, though that's coming soon enough. Here's something that might gross you out a bit, but is actually fascinating. Your body, while you're alive, is home to trillions of bacteria. Trillions. Most of them are beneficial or at least harmless, living peacefully on your skin, in your gut, in your mouth, in various other locations. They're part of you in a real sense, helping you digest food and protecting you from harmful microbes. While you're alive, your immune system and the various barriers of your body keep these bacteria in check, confined to specify C locations where they belong. But when you die, when those immune defenses shut down, these controls disappear. The bacteria begin to multiply unchecked and spread to areas they could never access before, areas that were sterile during life. They start breaking down your tissues, feeding on the complex molecules of your body, basically treating your remains as a feast. This bacterial activity produces gases as byproducts, including hydrogen sulfide, which smells like rotten eggs, methane, and various other compounds. These gases accumulate inside the body, causing it to bloat, sometimes quite dramatically. The abdomen typically swells first because that's where bacterial populations are highest during life, where most of your gut bacteria reside. This bloating can be quite extreme, sometimes causing fluids to be pushed out of body openings, which I know is unpleasant to think about, but it's part of the natural process. The gases also contribute significantly to the distinctive smell of decomposition, along with various chemicals produced as proteins and fats break down into smaller, often volatile molecules. The process continues with different tissues breaking down at remarkably different rates. Soft tissues like your brain, your liver, your other organs These decompose relatively quickly, but bones, teeth, and hair are much more resistant to breakdown. They can persist for years, decades, even centuries under the right conditions. The exact timeline depends enormously on environmental factors. Temperature is absolutely crucial. Warmth speeds up bacterial activity and chemical reactions dramatically, so decomposition proceeds much, much faster in hot conditions than in cold. A body buried in frozen ground might remain relatively preserved for years, looking almost as it did at death, but a body in a hot, humid environment, like a jungle or a closed room in summer, might be reduced to bones in just a few weeks. Moisture also matters tremendously. A body submerged in water decomposes very differently than one exposed to air. In water, especially cold water, the process can slow dramatically, and insects play an absolutely huge role if they have access to the body. Flies can detect death remarkably quickly and lay eggs within minutes. Their larvae, maggots, are shockingly efficient at consuming soft tissue. Forensic entomologists, scientists who study insects, can actually estimate time of death based on the species and life stages of insects present on a body, and this technique has proven remarkably accurate, sometimes more accurate than other methods. What about what you experience during this process? This is where we need to be very clear, very honest, about the distinction between objective physical processes that we can measure and subjective experience, consciousness, what it feels like to be you. Subjective experience requires a functioning brain. It requires those patterns of neural activity, that complex dance of electrical and chemical signals. Once your brain cells die, once those patterns cease, there is no experience. You don't experience being dead, because experience itself requires the machinery that's no longer working. It's like asking what a computer experience is when it's turned off. The question doesn't really make sense, because the processes that would constitute experience aren't happening. Now, there are reports from people who've been clinically dead, whose hearts have stopped, who've been without a pulse, and who've been revived. Some of these people report vivid experiences. They might describe seeing a bright light, feeling profound peace, having an out-of-body experience where they float above their body and watch the resuscitation efforts, seeing deceased relatives who welcome them. These accounts are absolutely real in the sense that people genuinely report them, and the experiences clearly feel real to those who have them. But what do they actually tell us? This is important. The crucial point is that these people weren't brain dead. Their brains still had some activity, were still processing information in some fashion, even though their hearts had stopped and they had no pulse. The brain can remain active for several minutes after the heart stops, running on whatever oxygen and glucose remain in the blood and tissues, like a laptop running on battery after you unplug it. What these near-death experiences most likely represent is the brain's response to extreme stress and oxygen deprivation, the brain struggling to make sense of its own malfunction. We know from lots of research that oxygen deprivation can cause vivid hallucinations. We know that the brain, when it's shutting down, doesn't do so in a coordinated, orderly fashion. Different systems fail at different rates. The visual system might start producing random firing patterns that the brain interprets as light or tunnels, like the static on an old television. The temporal lobe, which is involved in memory and emotion, might fire in ways that create intense feelings of peace or produce vivid memories. Areas involved in body awareness and spatial orientation might malfunction in ways that create a sense of floating or separation from your body. Critically, and this is really important, the content of these experiences varies by culture. People from different religious backgrounds tend to report experiences consistent with their existing beliefs. Christians might see Jesus or angels. Hindus might encounter different figures from their tradition. This cultural variation strongly suggests that these experiences are products of the brain interpreting its malfunction through the lens of existing beliefs and cultural frameworks, rather than objective perceptions of some external reality that exists beyond death. Moreover, we can produce remarkably similar experiences through other means. Certain drugs, particularly those that affect the brain's oxygen supply or its neurotransmitter systems like ketamine, can produce experiences almost identical to near-death experiences. Fighter pilots experiencing high G-forces, which reduce blood flow to the brain, report similar tunnels of light and feelings of peace. People in sensory deprivation tanks sometimes report similar experiences. The simplest explanation, the one that requires no additional assumptions beyond what we already know about brain function, is that near-death experiences are the brain's response to crisis, not evidence of consciousness surviving without a functioning brain. But what are you really? What is it that dies when you die? You might instinctively say your body dies, and that's true in one sense, but you probably also have this deep intuition that there's something more, some essential self, some core of awareness, or soul, that exists somehow beyond the physical. Let's think about this really carefully, because it matters. Everything we know about consciousness, about thought, about emotion, about memory, about personality, literally everything, is inextricably linked to brain function. We've learned this through unfortunate natural experiments. Damage to specific parts of the brain produces specific predictable changes in mental function. A stroke in the left frontal lobe can impair your ability to produce speech while leaving your comprehension perfectly intact. Damage to the hippocampus destroys your ability to form new long-term memories while leaving old memories relatively preserved. Injury to certain parts of the frontal cortex can radically change your personality, making a gentle person aggressive, or causing someone to lose their ability to plan or make decisions. If consciousness were independent of the brain, if it were some separate thing that the brain somehow interfaces with, we wouldn't expect these incredibly precise correlations. But we see them constantly, repeatedly, in case after case. Drugs that alter brain chemistry alter consciousness in predictable ways. Alcohol makes you disinhibited and impairs judgment. Caffeine increases alertness. Anesthetics, which interfere with certain neural processes, render you completely unconscious in a way that's reliably reversible. Diseases that progressively destroy brain tissue, like Alzheimer's, progressively destroy mental capacities. Every single piece of evidence we have points to consciousness being what the brain does, an emergent property of its physical processes, not something separate that the brain somehow communicates with. When you die, when the physical structure that gives rise to your consciousness breaks down, that's it. The pattern of connections between neurons built up over your lifetime through learning and experience. The carefully regulated concentrations of neurotransmitters, the electrical activity that somehow gives rise to thought and feeling, all of it ceases. The information that constituted you, encoded in those physical structures, is lost as those structures degrade. This is really no different in principle from a computer's hard drive being physically destroyed. The information on the drive wasn't stored somewhere else that the drive was accessing. It was the pattern of magnetic domains or electrical charges on the physical medium. And when that medium is destroyed, that information is genuinely gone. This is perhaps deeply uncomfortable to contemplate, and I understand that. We have these powerful, almost irresistible intuitions that we are more than just physical processes, that there's some essential self, some perspective that persists independently of the body. But these intuitions, however powerful they feel, aren't reliable guides to truth about how reality actually works. They're products of how our brains happen to work, of evolutionary adaptations that served our ancestors well in terms of survival and reproduction, but don't necessarily give us accurate pictures of reality. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective for a moment. Our ancestors who could think about themselves, who could model themselves as persistent entities, who could plan for the future by imagining themselves in different situations, these individuals had real survival advantages. This capacity for self-reflection, for modeling ourselves as coherent agents moving through time, is incredibly useful for complex social behavior and planning. But it also creates this compelling illusion of a self that's somehow separate from the body, a perspective from which we observe our lives unfolding. This is a useful model for a brain to maintain, a functional fiction that helps us navigate the world, but it's still a construction, something the brain creates, not an immaterial entity that exists independently. What about the atoms that make up your body? This is actually worth thinking about. They don't disappear when you die. They can't. One of the most fundamental laws of physics is conservation of matter and energy. Atoms can't be created or destroyed in ordinary processes. They can only be rearranged into different patterns and structures. The carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and trace amounts of other elements that compose your body will be recycled into the environment. Some will be taken up by bacteria and other decomposers as they break down your tissues. Some will enter the soil. Some will be taken up by plants through their roots and incorporated into new plant tissue. Some will eventually end up in the atmosphere or dissolve into groundwater and eventually the ocean. The atoms that are you today, that make up your body right now, were part of other things before. They might have been part of dinosaurs millions of years ago, or ancient forests, or other humans, or clouds, or anything. You're a temporary pattern in the endless flow of matter and energy through the universe. This might sound nihilistic or depressing at first, but I genuinely don't think it is. There's a profound beauty in being part of these great cycles, in the realization that the atoms in your hand right now were forged in the cores of ancient stars. The calcium in your bones, the iron in your blood that carries oxygen, these elements were created in stellar furnaces billions of years ago and scattered into space when those massive stars exploded in supernovas. They drifted through the cosmos for eons, eventually aggregating into our solar system, settling into our planet, cycling through rocks and water and countless living things, and ultimately into you. When you die, they'll continue their journey, becoming part of new structures, new processes, maybe new living things at some point. There's something almost poetic about that. The fact that our individual consciousness is temporary doesn't make it meaningless or worthless. If anything, it makes it more precious. The pattern that is you, that experiences and thinks and feels and loves and worries and dreams, is remarkable precisely because it's so unlikely, so complex, so exquisitely organized. You're the product of billions of years of evolution, of countless generations of organisms passing on successful variations through an unbroken chain stretching back to the origin of life itself. The fact that this particular pattern will eventually dissolve doesn't diminish what it is while it exists, while you exist. What about all the religious and spiritual traditions throughout human history that promise some form of continued existence after death? Reincarnation, heaven and afterlife, spiritual realms, these beliefs are nearly universal across human cultures, found everywhere. From ancient civilizations to modern societies, which tells us something really important about human psychology, about how our minds work and what we need emotionally, but it doesn't necessarily tell us anything about reality itself. Humans have a profound, deep-seated fear of death. This makes evolutionary sense because organisms that fear death and avoid dangerous situations are more likely to survive and reproduce. We also have a strong desire, almost a need, to believe that death isn't truly the end, that we'll see loved ones again, that our consciousness persists. We're also prone to finding agency and intention in the world around us, to seeing patterns and meanings even where none exist. These tendencies served our ancestors well in many contexts, helped them survive, but they can also lead us to believe things that simply aren't true, things that feel right but don't match reality. The various afterlife beliefs across different cultures are mutually contradictory. Christians believe in heaven and hell. Hindus and Buddhists believe in reincarnation. Ancient Egyptians had their own complex beliefs about the afterlife. They can't all be right simultaneously, though they could all be wrong. And importantly, crucially, we have no reliable evidence for any of them that stands up to scrutiny. People's near-death experiences, as we've discussed, can be explained quite well by brain function during crisis without invoking anything supernatural. Purported communications with the dead through mediums or other means have never been verified under properly controlled conditions. When tested scientifically, with precautions against fraud and self-deception, these claims consistently fail. Claims of past life memories, when investigated carefully, can typically be explained by normal psychological processes, by information the person was exposed to earlier and forgot they'd learned, by coincidence, or sometimes by deliberate or unconscious fraud. This doesn't prove with absolute certainty that there's no afterlife. You can't prove a negative like that. But it removes any rational, evidence-based reason for believing in one. When we have a natural explanation that fits all the evidence, when we can explain observations through known processes, we don't need to invoke supernatural ones. This is basic scientific reasoning, the principle of parsimony. We could imagine that invisible fairies move things around when we're not looking, but we don't need that hypothesis because we have much better, testable explanations for how and why things move. Does this mean we should live our lives differently? Should this knowledge change how we behave? That's not really a scientific question, but a philosophical one, a matter of values and personal choices. Science can tell us what is, how things work, but it can't tell us what we should value or how we should behave. Those are questions each person has to answer for themselves based on their values and what they find meaningful. Many people find that understanding death as a natural process, as the end of their individual consciousness rather than a transition to something else, actually makes them value life more. It makes them want to make the most of the limited time they have, makes them focus on leaving a positive impact through their actions and relationships and contributions rather than hoping for rewards in an afterlife. It can make relationships more precious, experiences more vivid, time more valuable when you realize it's truly finite. Others find this perspective troubling or deeply unsatisfying, and that's completely understandable. We evolved to fear death, and facing it squarely and honestly, without the comfort of believing in an afterlife or reunion with loved ones, can be genuinely challenging and painful. But truth, reality, isn't obligated to be comforting. The universe doesn't owe us meaning or continuation or happy endings. What we make of our brief existence is ultimately up to us. I want to be absolutely clear about what I'm not claiming here, because honesty requires acknowledging the limits of our knowledge. I'm not saying I have absolute certainty about what happens after death. Science is always provisional, always open to revision based on new evidence. If compelling, reproducible evidence for some form of consciousness surviving death emerged, if we found something that genuinely couldn't be explained by known physical processes, that would change the picture. Scientists would have to take it seriously and revise their understanding. But so far, despite thousands of years of human investigation, despite millions of people looking for such evidence across cultures, and throughout history, we haven't found any that holds up to careful scrutiny. Every phenomenon that's been carefully investigated and tested has turned out to have natural explanations. The scientific picture of death, that it's the cessation of the biological processes that maintain life, that consciousness ends when the brain stops functioning, that the matter and energy that composed us are recycled, but the pattern that was us dissolves. This picture is consistent with everything we've learned about biology, about neuroscience, about physics, about chemistry. It may not be what we prefer to be true. It's probably not what most people hope is true. But our preferences and hopes don't determine reality. Reality is what it is, regardless of what we wish. There's a certain honesty required to face this reality without flinching, to acknowledge that we're finite beings in a vast universe that existed for billions of years before we were born and will continue for billions more after we're gone. But there's also a kind of freedom in it that I've come to appreciate. If this life is all we have, if there's no cosmic judge watching and judging our every move, no eternal consequences beyond the real-world effects of our actions, then we're genuinely free to decide for ourselves what matters, what's worth pursuing, how to treat others, what kind of person we want to be. We can choose to find meaning in our relationships with others, in reducing suffering where we can, in understanding the universe and our place in it, in creating beauty or art or music, in raising children, in contributing to something larger than ourselves, in whatever we personally find valuable and worthwhile. Not because we're commanded to by some authority, not because we'll be rewarded in an afterlife, but simply because we've chosen it, because it matters to us and aligns with our values. When you die, the biological processes that sustain you will cease. The complex patterns of neural activity that somehow give rise to your consciousness, your sense of being you, will end, and the matter that composes you, those atoms that were temporarily organized into the pattern that is you, will begin their slow dissolution and recycling into other forms, continuing their journey through the universe. You won't experience being dead, because experience requires the biological machinery that will no longer be functioning. This is what the evidence tells us happens. This is what we can say based on what we actually know, rather than what we hope or fear.